President Xi Jinping arrives in Moscow this week. He'll meet with Putin and sign a number of bilateral agreements between the two countries. Foreign ministers from BRICS nations also met in Rio de Janeiro last week to discuss cooperation in the face of a new and uncertain economic world order introduced by the Trump tariffs. We'll discuss all this and more on this week's China Report. Welcome to the China Report, made in collaboration with Pivot to Peace. Every week, we'll be helping you sort through the propaganda with an independent view of the country that we're taught to hate, but know so little about. I'm Amanda Yee. These are this week's headlines. More than 1 in 4 Americans see Chinese people as a threat to U.S. society. That's according to a new poll released by the Status Index, or the social tracking of Asian Americans in the U.S. Other alarming figures from the survey: about 2/5 of Americans support legislation prohibiting foreign citizens from certain countries, including China, from purchasing land. Also, only 44% of Americans strongly agree that the forcible detainment of Japanese Americans during World War II was wrong. And 63% of Asian Americans reported feeling unsafe in at least one daily setting, with the same percentage believing it is at least somewhat likely that they'll be victims of discrimination based on their race, ethnicity, or religion in the next 5 years. President of Kenya, William Ruto, concluded a 5-day state visit to China last week, his third since taking office. The visit saw Kenya's deepening ties with Beijing and resulted in the signing of more than 20 bilateral agreements spanning infrastructure, trade, health, education, and digital technology. Kenya is currently grappling with severe economic challenges, including mounting debt owed to the IMF and the World Bank, as well as the imposition of new tariffs and suspended aid by the Trump administration. A key focus of the visit was revitalizing large-scale infrastructure projects, including the stalled standard gauge railway. Originally launched under former President Kenyatta, the SGR faced setbacks due to rising debt and limited financing. China has now committed to supporting its revitalization and extension, which will be key for Kenya's regional trade and integration. The two countries also signed a framework agreement on economic partnership for shared development aimed at expanding market access for Kenyan exports, such as tea, coffee, avocados, and macadamia nuts. Ruto and President Xi also reaffirmed their commitment to a more equitable global order. Chinese researchers have developed smart band-aids for organs that could make drug delivery more precise and efficient. A collaborative research team from Beihang University, Peking University, and other institutions has developed an electronic patch that acts like a band-aid for organs. According to the researchers, existing oral or intravenous drugs often float through the bloodstream and struggle to reach their exact target site. Not only is this inefficient, but it can also harm healthy organs along the way. Meanwhile, large molecule drugs face an even tougher challenge, as they are often blocked by the cell membrane, which acts as a security gate. The team integrated flexible electronics and micro-nano processing technologies to create the ultra-thin patch, which is as thin as a regular sheet of paper, and it can be attached directly to the surface of the organ. The patch's unique structure enables a wireless power supply, and it can safely perforate cell membranes at low voltage and through the ultra-high electric field strength formed within its nanopores, deliver drug molecules to the target site rapidly and precisely. The findings were published in the international academic journal Nature on April 30th. U.S. President Donald Trump said he would extend the June 19th deadline for China-based ByteDance to divest U.S. assets of TikTok if no deal is reached by then. A deal had been in the works that would spin off TikTok's U.S. operations into a new firm based in the U.S. and majority owned and operated by U.S. investors. But this deal was put on hold after China indicated it would not grant approval following Trump's announcement of 145% tariffs on Chinese goods. TikTok was required to stop operating by January 19th unless ByteDance had completed a divestiture of the app's U.S. assets. Trump began his second term on January 20th and opted not to enforce it. He first extended the deadline to early April and then again last month to June 19th. Finance ministers and central bank governors of the ASEAN countries, plus Japan, China, and South Korea, met on Sunday in Milan and reaffirmed their commitment to a rules-based, free, fair, and transparent multilateral trading system. They warned of the potential global economic fallout from protectionist trade policies following the announcement by U.S. President Donald Trump of higher import tariffs. After announcing his sweeping tariffs on April 2nd, Trump then granted a 90-day pause to all countries except for China, which is facing a maximum of 245% tariffs on some exports to the US. ASEAN members Cambodia and Vietnam are facing hefty US levies of 49% and 46%, respectively, while Trump imposed reciprocal tariffs of 24% on Japan and 25% on South Korea. In a joint statement, the group asserted, escalating trade protectionism weighs on global trade, leading to economic fragmentation, affecting trade, investment, and capital flows across the region. President Xi Jinping is set to arrive in Moscow tomorrow, May 7th. He's expected to meet with Putin and attend Victory Day celebrations, marking the 80th anniversary of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany. And last week, BRICS foreign ministers met in Rio de Janeiro to discuss cooperation in the face of Trump's tariffs. To discuss these two important meetings, we are so glad to have on Marco Fernandes. Marco is a geopolitical analyst for Brasil de Fato, an editor of Wenhua Zongheng International, and a member of the Brazilian chapter of the BRICS Civil Council. He's based in Beijing, but joins us today from Moscow. Marco, welcome to the China Report.
Thank you so much for having me here, Amanda. It's a pleasure. First of all, I follow you on social media for so many years. So finally, very glad to be able to talk to you.
Well, we're so pleased to have you on. As I mentioned earlier, she is expected to arrive in Moscow tomorrow. The visit coincides with the 80th anniversary of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany. He's going to attend Victory Day celebrations. You arrived in Moscow, yesterday. I know there were some drone strikes this morning from Ukraine. What is the overall mood right now in anticipation of Xi's visit? And could you talk a little bit about the significance of his visit at this particular time?
Well, first of all, I think the city is, first of all, very excited about the celebrations. This is a historical one, 8th anniversary of the Victory Day. So I've been here actually a few days already, and there's a lot of decoration. The whole city is so beautiful. So many symbols about the victory. You have this the big logo, the Победа, victory in Russian, and is literally all around. Even shops are decorated with the logos. So it's beautiful. Lots of hammer and sickles from Soviet times, of course, and at the same time, there is a tension in the air. As you mentioned, this morning we had this drone attacks to Moscow, other cities of Russia. The airports were, all the airplanes were grounded for about 2 hours, 3 or 4 airports in the city. There's a lot of security, of course. And I think most of all, people are concerned about the outrageous threats that Zelensky did a few days ago, saying that, we cannot guarantee the security of the heads of states going to Russia these days, which is ridiculous. It's a huge disrespect for not only, of course, for Russia, for the meaning of the date, but for leaders like Xi Jinping, like Lula from Brazil, like South Africa's Ramaphosa, Egypt, Belarus. There's 27 heads of state would be present in the Red Square. So in that sense, I think it's ridiculous what Zelensky was doing. So I think there's a mixture of excitement and also tension. But regarding Xi Jinping and Putin's one more visit, I think this is the 44th or 45th meeting between both of them since Xi Jinping became president of China in 2013. And general secretary a few months before in 2012. So, I think there's no other partnership as strong right now, at least in the global south, as Russia and China. There's a lot of expectations. Some agreements might be signed. I would say one of the most important ones and more, I think, difficult ones in the last years is the agreement about the pipeline, the huge gas pipeline called Power of Siberia 2, which has more or less a capacity, a little bit less of Nord Stream 1 and 2. And this is something actually that Russia is very eager to build, because this would be a sort of compensation for the blockade that Europe imposed since 2022. But at the same time, for China, it's also not so easy, because China is already buying a lot of gas coming from Power of Siberia 1. So we know that there's still some disagreements regarding the price, regarding the timeline for the construction of the pipeline. So this is one of the things that they expected to discuss next days. But I think, I mean, other also agreements and discussions about what to do with the Trump tariffs, what to do with BRICS. We have the summit in Brazil coming in a few months. What to do with Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There's also all the discussions about finance cooperation, how to bypass the dollar, as they are already actually doing a lot. So I think there's a big expectation for this meeting, and already Putin also confirmed that he's going to go to China in September for the celebration of the victory, the Chinese victory over the Japanese, of the fascist Japanese, and also in the World War II. So I think this is going to be one more historical visit and one more historical meeting between both presidents, Xi Jinping and Putin.
Well, I do want to talk about this really strong partnership between China and Russia. Russia and China have been in a strategic partnership for nearly 30 years now. And the two countries have only grown closer since the beginning of the Ukraine war. You know, they've expanded trade and military ties since the beginning of the war. I remember back in early February, he initiated peace talks with Ukraine. And a lot of analysts at that time were saying that he was trying to do a reverse Kissinger, that he was trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China. Now, a few months later, the peace talks between the U.S. and Russia have pretty much stalled, and ties between China and Russia are stronger than ever. If you read mainstream media in the U.S., what they tend to say is that this alliance between Russia and China is based on mutual commitment to autocracy. It's based on shared hatred of the United States, as well as a shared hatred of democracy and democratic values, which seems pretty shallow, right? On the other hand, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, he said in a statement in March, a month ago, where he described the relationship between China and Russia as one based on non-alliance, non-confrontation, and not targeting any third country. So I'm curious your thoughts on the stability of this relationship between China and Russia over the decades. You know, is it something that's due to a shared commitment to authoritarianism, as U.S. media likes to describe it, or is it something else?
Well, very good question. First of all, I think we know that this autocracy narrative, it's totally bullshit. First of all, I think fewer leaders in the planet right now had so much popular support as Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. I can talk about China, been living in China for 5 years. I don't think that a Chinese, it's not myself. I mean, there is surveys, there is studies, even from Harvard. I remember like a few years ago, Harvard launched this big comprehensive research they did about the people's support to the Communist Party of China, and they're showing that the support they had in 2016 when they launched the finalized research were greater than when they started like 10 years before that. And you can see this. We can see, because I would say comparing China and Russia with countries like Brazil, like Latin American countries, or even US, I think people feel, both in China and Russia, that their lives are getting better at each year. Every year is better for, like, as a whole, as the year before, as 10 years before. And so, we know how much this narrative about democracy and against autocracy. We're talking about, look what Trump is doing right now in the US. It doesn't look like democracy, what he has been doing, or what Macron did a few months ago when he lost elections for the left party, from the La France Insoumise, and he refused to assign somebody from some representative from Mélenchon's party to be the prime minister, as it should be. So, the West is no longer a model of democracy, if it was any time in history. But anyway, So going back to the partnership, one thing I think it's important also to highlight is that this partnership has grown a lot, I would say, in the last 10 years, 10, 11 years. Remember that until 2014, there was still some border issues between China and Russia. And I think also this last 10 years was the time where Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, they got closer. They built a huge trust among them and the top leadership of both countries. And one thing I would say, now having spent some time in Russia in the last years and 5 years in China, is that there's still a lot of historical, I would say, caution from both sides, especially I think in the level of common sense, of ordinary people, or even to scholars. You can listen to scholars both sides. It's like, oh yeah, it's very important. I think this is a strategic partnership, but let's see. We don't know. We have some bad experiences in history, and it's true. I mean, we know how much the split between China and Soviet Union in the 60s, they carved a sort of like a deep consequences in both sides. But I think this is absolutely overcame now, especially in the last few years. And from trade, I mean, the last year they had like almost a $250 billion trade. I mean, actually, the goal for 2024 they established, like, I think 5 years ago, was $200 billion. So actually, they surpassed in 25% the goal that they both established a few years ago. The same if you go to energy. Right now, because of the U.S. and European sanctions and the fact that a lot of European companies and U.S. companies, they left Russia, of course, Chinese companies arrived. So it's amazing to see. You go to the streets, it's like Chinese cars all around. You get a Yandex, which is the equivalent of an Uber here, and most of the cars are Chinese. The telephones are Chinese. A lot of Chinese tourists here in Moscow, and the same in China. Russian tourists in China. So this is huge. And I would say, like, for just two more examples, something that people don't talk so much still, they have very ambitious plans, for instance, in space cooperation. They are both, China and Russia, they are planning to build this lunar station until the mid of 2030s, and it's a common project. So, I mean, this is the level of trust they have. And I would say, finally, one very interesting example of what's happening right now in the border between China and Russia, specifically two cities, Rehe in Chinese side and Blagoveshchensk in Russian side, two cities that now are connected, and there's no more passport control for residents. They can go back and forth. There's a lot of business going on, and the Chinese schools, everybody is learning Russian, and the Russian schools, everybody is learning Chinese. So I think this is a big example of how much the cooperation, the partnership of both countries are evolving. And I don't think there's any chance of the reverse Kissinger, because, I mean, China and Russia, they both need each other, and they know that together they are able to challenge all the attacks from the West and from Europe and NATO right now. So I think this is only going to grow in the next years.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, you mentioned the famous Harvard study where 90% of Chinese citizens have a favorable view of their government. And I just wanted to highlight something else to support that. There was another Western study that was done by the Edelman Trust Barometer that found China to be the country rated highest globally in terms of people's trust in their government. And China has held the top spot nearly every year. And I think the only year that they didn't was 2018. I'm not sure where the US lies, where it falls on that survey, but it's like much farther down. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out. But moving along, this visit, due to take place from May 7th to May 10th, it coincides with heightened tensions between China and the US over Trump's really severe trade tariffs. And as part of Xi's visit, he and Putin are expected to strengthen their coordination with the UN, strengthen their coordination with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well as BRICS. They're also expected to sign a number of bilateral agreements and hold talks expanding cooperation between the two countries. So, do you see this strong alliance as capable of providing further stability and leading the way in this uncertain economic future that the Trump's tariffs are ushering in? Yeah, I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's the big expectation from the whole global South, or the global majority, as they like to say here in Russia, for the coordination between among, I mean, both countries being both in BRICS now and Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and being very coordinated also in United Nations, and I mean in all the discussions, the geopolitical discussions right now. I think there's a big expectation that they can play a major role, and of course if you put China and Russia together in terms of economic capacity, technological, diplomatic, military, I would say, I mean, look at, for instance, what is the role of Russia right now in the Sahel countries, or was the role of Russia in the last couple of years to allow Sahel countries to have a more sovereign position and being able to kick out literally the French that was not actually helping with the terrorism issues that they were fighting against. So I think there is a big expectation. But again, I think there's still a lot of work to be done, especially in BRICS. I think we're going to talk about BRICS soon. But I would say that still, I would say both China and Russia, I think they have strong partnership among them. And also, I think both are moving in very important partnership with other countries, like, for instance, Iran right now, that China had a very strong commitment agreement with Iran a few years ago. It's like a 25 years agreement. There's no official data from both sides, but there's some rumors that this might be like a $400 billion agreement between China and Iran, where Iran would supposed to provide gas and oil, especially for China, and China would provide Iran with trains, metros, roads, infrastructure in general, and technology. Russia has just also signed a very important strategic agreement with Iran. And let's remember that Iran is also a member of BRICS now and is a member of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And of course, we know, everybody knows the major role that Iran is playing right now in West Asia, trying to contain the genocide of Palestinian people, and trying to contain the expansion of Israel around the region. So I think this is one example, but we can also go, for instance, like what China playing role is playing now in Latin America, in Africa. Russia is also more and more present in Africa with a lot of economic partnerships with African countries. So I think there's a big potential, and I would say that my expectation, personal expectation, is that they are able also to implement this capacity, especially within BRICS, which I think it's probably the most strategic platform that we have today in the global South.
Well, speaking of BRICS, we want to switch gears a bit. Last Monday, on April 28th, the BRICS foreign ministers, they convened in Rio de Janeiro, and Trump's tariffs were at the center of these discussions. So I know you follow BRICS very closely. What were some of your key takeaways from this meeting?
Well, I mean, I would say, first of all, there was a not so good news, which was the lack of a joint statement of the Minister of Foreign Relations from the BRICS countries. I mean, there's a lot of discussion in the media, in Western media. I mean, even Brazilian media, it was, of course, they were following closely. And there is this issue of the Security Council, that there was not consensus about the proposal from Brazil to get a agreement about the support of BRICS to the bid of Brazil, India, and South Africa to the to the Security Council of United Nations. So this was reported, but we know there's a lot of other issues right now within BRICS that makes complex. I would say, first of all, BRICS now it's 10 or 11 countries. I don't know Saudi Arabia if it's in or it's not. They send people, but they don't send high level people, but they are in the meetings. But anyway, so of course that moving from a five countries group to a 11 or 10, 11 countries group makes everything much more complex. And I would say that this issue that BRICS has, they try to make decisions only if there is consensus about, among all the countries. I would say this would be very hard to keep with 11 countries, and even if the expansion goes on in the next year. So I think this is one of the things that BRICS should discuss more, because it's going to be very difficult to move in a decision-making process only with consensus. So again, the meeting had some important statements about the tariffs and about how much the U.S. is. They didn't mention U.S. actually because they are trying to be diplomatic and not attack U.S. directly, because countries like Brazil and others are trying also to negotiate with the U.S. About the tariffs. But it was an important also statement that World Trade Organization should be revived, should be taken seriously. But to be honest, we know that U.S. is not going to respect that, and Trump is not going to move and for instance, starting to recognize WTO as a international forum that U.S. should respect. So that's not going to happen. But anyway, this is still a meeting of the foreign ministers. There's a lot of negotiations from now until July, which is the summit, 6th and 7th. And I would say also there is a last thing is that one difficulty that we have this year with the Brazilian chairmanship is that Brazil set the summit for July. It's a very short time for the complex negotiations that that BRICS has to deal with, because Brazil is also hosting COP30 in November, so they made this decision to have a shorter chairmanship of BRICS to be able to deploy all the energy and resources after July to the COP30, which, in my humble opinion, I think it was not good for BRICS, because this level of complexities needed more time to negotiate. Let's remember, for instance, that the Russian summit was at the end of October, so it was 3 months more for negotiate. So I think this will be also some of the challenges that BRICS will have this year.
Mm. Well, yeah, you mentioned that they failed to issue a joint communique, even though they projected unity when it came to Trump's tariffs. And I was just wondering, the U.S. media has really seized upon this and sort of, discussed it in the terms of BRICS showing these internal divisions or these internal rifts among member states. Do you think that these internal divisions reveal the limitations of BRICS as an economic bloc rather than, like a purely ideological one?
Well, I think according to what media reported, the key issue of the lack of a joint statement was the issue of, as I was telling you, the Security Council of United Nations. Because this is for Brazil, this is one of the main issues for BRICS, is to get support to become a member of the Security Council, which is part of the whole discussion of BRICS and other countries of the Global South of the necessity of reform of United Nations as a whole and its institutions. So I think this is one of the things. But I would say, my opinion is that also these issues of Security Council and things related to like diplomatic and global governance, I think they are much more complicated to get consensus at this point. I would say that one of the things that maybe BRICS should try to make more progress, as you just mentioned, as economic bloc, as economic group, would be more economic cooperation. I think there's much more space for having economic cooperation, either like building some alternatives to the dollar system, for instance, alternatives to SWIFT, which is actually they are discussing right now. There are actually so many good ideas being discussed in BRICS and not so much in the media. I give you two examples. So Russia, for instance, they proposed the creation of a BRICS grain exchange, because basically what they were saying, this comes from Russia. So they were saying, look, BRICS now is the major producer of grains in the planet. If you get rice, soy, corn, wheat, BRICS producing most of the. In case of rice, for instance, is already more than 50%. In case of soy, wheat, corn is around 40 something until almost 50%. So President Putin said last year, is like, okay, if we are producing the grains or the majority of the grains, why the price of the grains are still defined by the Chicago Stock Exchange? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. We should have our own platform, because this would allow us to have more influence on the prices, keep more stability of the prices, because you know that, I mean, when it comes to commodities market, it's not only about supply and demand that make the prices go up or down. It's about speculation. It's about how much the huge investors in the planet, they are able to pull the strings and influence price. So this is one of the things they're discussing. The same, for instance, with the energy cooperation. BRICS is also a superpower in energy production. More than 50% of the oil reserves, almost 60% of the gas reserves, 70% of the nuclear production, or at least the uranium, enriched uranium, comes from Russia and China. And in regarding renewables, if you put China, of course, by far is the first in production of renewable energy, solar, wind energy, and also hydroelectric. But if you take Brazil and India, so China, Brazil, and India together today, they produce more renewable energy than the whole G7 combined. So this is the kind of cooperation that, I mean, you hear sometimes countries, some leaders saying, "Oh, we need more cooperation on energy or in grants, in food production, these kind of things." But I think there's still a lot of work and discussions to be done. So I think this kind of cooperations will be much more easy now to have an agreement than, for instance, to discuss the Security Council, United Nations. But I know, I mean, of course, this is very important. Of course, for Brazil, this is a major issue. But maybe we could have more tactical movements in the next couple of years to try to get BRICS more aligned, with more unity, and especially thinking that the expansion of the five, six new countries, it's a very complex challenge for the next years, how to get these countries aligned. So I think we have to be a little bit patient, because I know that we are all very eager and anxious to have alternatives to the hegemony of U.S. and Europe in the world. But I think this is also will be a very complex task for the BRICS countries.
Well, you mentioned this earlier, but like one thing that the BRICS nations are aligned on is the shared belief that we should move away from dependence on the US dollar. So at this meeting, the BRICS reps, they criticized these kinds of unilateral protectionist measures that were put forth by the Trump administration. I know Brazilian officials have been discussing the possibility of promoting trade in local currencies to lessen dependence on the US dollar, also increasing mutual trade without using the dollar. So in your view, do you think Trump's tariffs will actually backfire on him and accelerate the reshaping of the global trade system and accelerate multipolarity? Or is that a little bit overly optimistic at this point?
No, I don't think so. I think there's a big potential, and the pieces are moving in the chessboard already. I mean, there's so many. I mean, China is doing a lot of moves. I mean, Xi Jinping just had a few days in Southeast Asia, doing new agreements with Malaysia, with Indonesia, with Vietnam, with Cambodia. I mean, Xi Jinping is coming to Brazil actually, Lula is coming to China before that. I mean, in a few days. Actually, President Lula from Brazil is now in Moscow. He's arriving, I think, in a few hours. From Moscow, he's going to China. And there is a very important negotiations happening, not so much so public still, but there's very important negotiations happening since November last year when President Xi Jinping went to Brazil for the G20 and for a state visit. There's, for instance, discussion about cooperation in finance, because, I mean, Brazil is trying also to have more, create a more defense against speculation. That is one of the biggest problems that President Lula have right now from the so-called market. There is discussion, for instance, about the connection between Brazil and the Chancay port in Peru, which would be a revolution for the trade in Brazil, for the freight in Brazil. There is discussion about other infrastructure projects. So we are expecting in Brazil that some interesting agreements might be signed in a few days in Beijing. And then Xi Jinping is coming, of course, for the summit, the BRICS summit in July in Brazil. So a lot of things is going on right now because, of course, the countries are realizing that U.S. is no longer a reliable partner, and they have to create their own alternatives. So, but again, I wouldn't underestimate the power of the empire. I think the empire is getting weaker, it's getting desperate, but they still have a lot of power, and especially they have huge influence on the ruling classes of the global South in many countries. So, I mean, a country like Brazil, most of the ruling class in Brazil, they still dream to, to buy, they have houses in Miami. The same, the ruling class in the whole Latin America, they rather align with the US than BRICS or China or Russia. And you can see this, for instance, right now in the Brazilian government. There is not like a unity regarding BRICS, for instance. There are sectors of the government that are more pro-BRICS. There are some sectors of government that are very suspicious of BRICS. And this happens also in South Africa. This happens in India. This happens in Indonesia. So I wouldn't underestimate at this point still the power and the influence that United States have in our own countries in the global South.
Mm. Well, Marco, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for joining the China Report. And maybe to end, could you, give viewers an idea of where people can find your work?
Well, I mean, right now you can go to Brasil de Fato, which is Brazilian media in Portuguese. Also, there's a now English channel, so you can go there, brasildefato.com.br. You can also find one of the things that we've been working in this project with Wenhua Zongheng. It's actually a partnership that we're doing with this very prestigious Chinese journal, and we are publishing some articles in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. This you can find in the tricontinental.org website. You can find Wenhua Zongheng. We have already 6 issues. We are launching the next one in a couple of months. So it's very interesting because it's very rare that you find Chinese scholars' articles in English, Portuguese, and Spanish. And you can find also in Guancha, the website that also, I publish a lot there. So yeah, you can find me there and maybe here again soon.
Absolutely. Yes, please come back. But Wenhua Zongheng is an excellent journal and really looking forward to the next issue. Thank you, Marco. Well, to end the show, we have a short clip from Mongolia. This woman is playing the morankur, or horsehead fiddle, a traditional Mongolian instrument named by UNESCO as one of the masterpieces of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. According to UNESCO, the two-string fiddle has figured prominently in Mongolia's nomad culture, and its significance extends beyond its function as a musical instrument, for it was traditionally an integral part of rituals and everyday activities of the Mongolian nomads. Just as a reminder, if you like this episode, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next week on the China Report.